You're listening to Big World at Work.
Small Steps, Episode 1. Written and read by Eliza. Mercy, Alice grumbled from beneath her comforter, trying to shut out the irritating buzzing of the alarm clock. She knew that if she waited long enough, something terrible would happen to the offending piece of technology, like getting smashed with a lamp, or skewered by an expertly aimed crossbow bolt. It was the 5th clock they had changed that semester, but as the torture continued, she worried that this one might outlive all its predecessors. After the 4th round of buzzing, she grudgingly got out of bed and surprised herself by actually keeping enough restraint to push the off button rather than smash the infernal machine against the nearest wall. As she walked towards the kitchen in search of coffee, she vaguely wondered where her roommate of the precision strikes and ever-present crossbow was. There was something about were-chickens, or maybe were-hamsters, or some other silly were-combo like that, and a new support group. Except, no, that wasn't right. They had both been doing goblin control duty the week before, and, even half asleep, Alice clearly remembered talking to Professor Garskin about goblin-wrangling, making up for werecreature support group duty, and earning them a few extra credits on his French folklore class. Still mostly asleep, Alice filled the old coffee pot with water, added 2 spoonfuls of coffee, and left it to brew. She was missing something. There was something big. It wasn't conference season, she was sure of that, so they still needed to go to class. Except they didn't. It slowly dawned on her as she watched the coffee boil over. Because they had no classes to go to. Her roommate had taken off the moment news came that the south wing had vanished into thin air. Cursing her luck and alarm clock, Alice threw the coffee pot into the sink, turning off the stove as she went. She could clean up later. Right now, she was going to take advantage of magical mishaps that were actually not her fault, and finally get some rest. She was going to unplug the alarm clock, curl back into bed, and sleep as much as she wanted. Outside her windows, snow was gently falling, trying in vain to blanket the ground. It wasn't exactly strange weather for this late in November, but it was too early for it to settle, and she wasn't planning on leaving the house anytime soon. She reminded herself to get the cinnamon-flavored cocoa and treat herself to a nice hot mug when she woke up again. This weather was the perfect excuse for that. Alice had great plans for her impromptu holiday. They mostly involved sleeping. She intended to sleep through November, and, unless the south wing had been recovered in the meantime, come out of hibernation around Christmas, when her mom usually showed up to whisk her off on a random trip to someplace tropical. If actual hibernation wasn't an option, she could catch up on her reading, or get some of the arrow holes in their apartment fixed before her roommate returned. She'd have to stock up on alarm clocks, too. Maybe something that played annoyingly cheerful Japanese pop songs. That would make their demise all the more satisfying. However, the universe seemed to have other plans for her. Before she could even enjoy a full day's sleep, the futility of her plans was brought to her attention by an insistent knock on the door, followed by her phone breaking out into the ringtone assigned to her mother. With a resigned sigh, she answered, her words muffled with sleep. "Yeah, Mom?" "I'm outside. If you're not home, I can wait at the cafe till you get back, but Carmen said you're probably in," her mother informed her cheerily. "Just sleepin'," Alice mumbled, getting out of bed. "Hang on." She hung up, shuffling into the hallway to let her in. Some days she could swear her mother had an extra sense, telling her when her daughter had any time to herself so she could hijack it. Not necessarily for evil, since it usually meant ending up somewhere that required swimwear, but sleep was higher on Alice's list of priorities. Other days, it was easier to pinpoint the source of her mom's intel. "Your roommate called," her mother informed her by way of greeting. She was dressed snugly, if a bit too snug for the weather, and radiated the sort of cheerfulness only a mother calling dibs on her child's time could master. The merriment did soften the impact of the intrusion, though, and, hugging her mother, she decided to deal with her treacherous roommate later. Said the university's under renovation, and that you're free for a while. Well, that was one way of explaining things, Alice guessed. So you decided to keep me company? Even better. The smile on her mother's lips set off alarm bells before she even explained her plans. How fast can you pack for a mountain trip? Alice cocked an incredulous eyebrow at her. Did you break up with Dad again? The offended look her mother adopted was more for show than anything, but Alice knew she had hit a nerve. A lot of old friends have been getting Facebook profiles lately, and it's been easier to get in touch with everyone. We've been planning a little get-together for months. Why would your father have anything to do with my traveling arrangements? Alice shrugged. So my vacation just happened to fall at the right time? Perfect timing, her mother sing-songed, though I was going to grab you and take you away from academic responsibility anyway. I know you and your workaholic ways. What's the catch? No catch. You just have to spend a week with your dear old mother and her old friends, admire the lovely mountainside of a far-off land, maybe meet a cute guy, and do nothing for a change. School will still be here when you get back. That last promise made Alice smile, as if her presence made any difference in the school's continued existence. With her luggage packed and her passport in hand, and, last but not least, all her expenses paid for, Alice soon found herself dragged halfway across the world to a country whose name sent alarm bells ringing in her head. She had to push aside the dread that kept welling up whenever Romania was mentioned, and remind herself that Dracula was fictional. Also, real vampires were not as bad as the media made them out to be. As long as she held on to that thought, she was going to be okay. After all, no one else seemed concerned with that little detail. So there she was, in a cabin in the mountains, because someone in her mother's group of friends knew someone who ran the place, and they thought it was a brilliant idea to stay there rather than at a hotel or in a resort. Alice had to admit it was kind of cozy, and her mother's friends were a colorful bunch, so it was all for the best. Aside from the snowstorm raging outside, but she was warm and comfy enough not to care. Sorry we didn't get to do any sightseeing, dear, her mother apologized, and for dragging you off like that, she continued with a shrug. I think you remember some of the gang from when you were little, but I'll introduce you to everyone later tonight. It'll be fun, she assured her. She was incredibly cheery for someone who had spent the past couple of days packing, unpacking, threatening airport employees over the safety of her luggage, and still making her connecting flight. Alice didn't have the same levels of energy. It's okay, Mom. No, it's not, her mother countered, more thoughtful and heavy than a moment ago. Do you remember my friend Sarah? Alice nodded absently as she rummaged through her memories of years gone by, until she found a woman who looked so much like her mother she'd once thought they were related. Well, if Aunt Sarah was coming, maybe this unexpected trip was going to be worth it for more than just the time off. She hadn't seen the woman in ages, but somehow she suspected she was behind at least part of her mother's current excitement. Yeah, she said with a fond smile. I remember Aunt Sarah. She's bringing her kid along. Well, everyone's bringing their kids, but you remember Kyle, right? A bright mop of ginger hair came to mind. He was around her own age, and before she could say as much, her mother presented her with a beaming smile and started unpacking. She was exuding an air of smug satisfaction, and, as she hung their clothes in the closet, Alice could almost physically feel her plotting. Her phone chirped in her pocket, and its screen announced a text from her roommate. Carmen. You can thank me when we're both back. The Witch of the West says hi.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World at Work.